Hey guys, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, a connected done, epiphany, a mind-blown moment, a new book to read, a new author to explore, please consider supporting my work. All the links at the bottom of this video in the description. Hi! Well, was going to do a reading yesterday. The day before, I was super sick. Super sick. Sick. Like, couldn't talk, sneezing. I'm still very congested, but we're getting there. Yesterday, tornado hit Gary. Up that way. And we were supposed to get a lot of damaging storms and stuff. Thankfully, I did meditation. Nothing happened. But I had to prepare because of the risks. And a lot of people got hit by tornadoes yesterday. So thankfully, it didn't hit here. Didn't lose power. But not too far from me was tornado sirens and damage. So very blessed and thankful for that. So I didn't want to come on and the sound goes off, the lights go off, and then my video is shot. Currently, my heat isn't really working either. So we went from 72 beautiful degrees the last 2 days, and then it dropped down into the 20s. And my heat isn't popping back on, and I have radiant heat. So I am sitting toasty with my heater underneath my desk, heating me up. It's not too bad in my house, but it's cold for me. In a house. Anywho. Manly P. Hall, Secret Teachers of All Ages. The Chemical Marriage. This is going to be a good one. And before I begin, to those who know and those who don't know, I'm dyslexic. That's why I always have a pencil in my hand. I see sometimes words that are not there, so please excuse that. Also, from here, you see a little gap right there all the way back. This falls down, so projecting certain words or pronunciating certain words, they don't come out clearly or properly. So we do apologize beforehand. We all have things that we struggle with, and those are two hindrances that do. Fun times in life. Phone calls. Beautiful. The Chemical Marriage. The self-admitted author of The Chemical Marriage, Johann Valentin Andre, born in Württemberg in 1586, was 28 years of age when that work was first published. It was presumably written about 20 years prior to its publication, or when the author was 15 or 16 years old. The fact is almost incredible that one so young could produce a volume containing the wealth of symbolic thought and philosophy hidden between the lines of The Chemical Marriage. The book makes the earliest known reference to Christian Rosenkreutz and is generally regarded as the third of the series of original Rosicrucian manifestos. As a symbolic work, the book itself is hopelessly irreconcilable with the statements made by Andre concerning it. The story of The Chemical Marriage relates in detail a series of incidents occurring to an aged man, presumably the father, CRC, and the Fama and Confessio. If Father CRC was born in 1378, as stated in the Confessio, and is identical with the Christian Rosenkreutz of the chemical marriage. He was elevated to the dignity of Knight of the Golden Stone in the 81st year of his life, 1459. In the light of his own statements, it is inconceivable that Andre could have been Father Rosie Cross. Many figures found in various books on symbolism published in the early part of the 17th century bear a striking resemblance to the characters and episodes in The Chemical Marriage. The alchemical wedding may prove to be the key to the riddle of Baconian Rosicrucianism. The presence in the German text of The Chemical Marriage of some words, English, indicates its author to have been conservant also with the language. The following summary of the main episodes of the 7 days of The Chemical Marriage will give the reader a fairly comprehensive idea of the profundity of its symbolism. The first day. Christian Rosenkreutz, having prepared in his heart the Paschal lamb together with small unleavened loaf, was disturbed while at prayer one evening before Easter by a violent storm which threatened to demolish not only his little house, but the very hill on which it stood. In the midst of the tempest, he was touched on the back, and turning, he beheld a glorious woman with wings, filled with eyes, and robed in sky-colored garments, spangled with stars. In one hand she held a trumpet, and in the other a bundle of letters in every language. Handing a letter to CRC, she immediately ascended into the air, at the same time blowing upon her trumpet a blast which shook the house. Upon the seal of the letter was a curious cross in the words INHOCSIGNO with entraced in letters of gold. An azure field was an invitation to a royal wedding. CRC was deeply moved by the invitation because it was the fulfillment of a prophecy which he had received 7 years before, but so unworthy did he feel that he was paralyzed with fear. At length, after resorting to prayer, he sought sleep. In his dreams, he found himself in a loathsome dungeon with a multitude of other men, all bound and fettered with great chains. The grievousness of their sufferings was increased as they stumbled over each other in the darkness. Suddenly from above came the sound of trumpets. The cover of the dungeon was lifted, and a ray of light pierced the gloom. Famed in the light stood a hoary-headed man who announced that a rope would be lowered 7 times, and whoever could cling to the rope would be drawn up to freedom. Great confusion ensued. All sought to grasp the rope, and many were pulled away from it by others. CRC despaired of being saved, but suddenly the rope swung towards him, and grasping it, he was raised from the dungeon. An aged woman called the ancient matron wrote in a golden yellow book the names of those drawn forth, and each of the redeemed was given for remembrance a piece of gold bearing the symbol of the sun and the letters DLSCRC. Who had been injured while clinging to the rope found it difficult to walk. The aged woman bade him not to worry, but to thank God who had permitted him to come into such a high light. Thereupon trumpets sounded, and CRC awoke, but so vivid was the dream that he was still sensible of the wounds received while asleep. With renewed faith, CRC arose and prepared himself for the hermetic marriage. He donned a white linen coat and bound a red ribbon crosswise over his shoulders. In his hat he stuck 4 roses, and for food he carried bread, water, and salt. Before leaving his cottage, he knelt and vowed that whatever knowledge was revealed to him, he would devote the service of his neighbor. He then departed from his house with joy. the second day. As he entered the forest surrounding his little house, it seemed to CRC that all nature had joyously prepared for the wedding. As he proceeded singing merrily, he came to a green heath, in which stood 3 great cedars, one bearing a tablet with an inscription describing the 4 paths that led to the palace of the king. The first short and dangerous, the second courteous, the third a pleasant and royal road, and the fourth suitable only for incorruptible bodies. Weary and perplexed, CRC decided to rest, and cutting a slice of bread, was about to partake thereof when a white dove begged it from him. The dove was at once attacked by a raven, and in his efforts to separate the birds, CRC unknowingly ran a considerable distance along one of the 4 paths that leading southward. A terrific wind preventing him from retracing his steps, the wedding guest resigned himself to the loss of his bread and continued along the road until he espied in the distance a great gate. The sun being low, he hastened towards the portal, upon which, among other figures, was a tablet bearing the words, Procule hinc procule it profani. A gatekeeper in sky-color habit immediately asked CRC for his letter of invitation, and upon receiving it, bade him enter and request that he purchase a token. After describing himself as a brother of the Red Rosy Cross, CRC received in exchange for his water bottle a golden disc bearing the letter SC. Sorry, guys. Night drawing near, the wanderer hastened on to a second gate, guarded by a lion, and to which was affixed a tablet with the words Date et DABITURVOLIS, where he presented a letter given to him by the first gatekeeper. Being urged to purchase a token bearing the letters SM, he gave his little package of salt and then hastened on to reach the palace gates before they were locked for the night. A beautiful virgin called Virgo Luciferia, I think, was extinguishing the castle lights at CRC approach, and he was barely able to squeeze through the closing gates. As they closed, they caught part of his coat, which he was forced to leave behind. Here his name was written in the Lord Bridegroom's little vellum book, and he was presented with a new pair of shoes, and also a token bearing the letters SPN. He was then conducted by pages to a small chamber where the icy gray locks were cut from the crown of his head by invisible barbers, after which he was ushered into a spacious hall where a goodly number of kings, princes, and commoners were assembled. At the sound of the trumpets, each seated himself at the table, taking a position responding to his dignity, so that CRC received a very humble seat. Most of the pseudo-philosophers being vain pretenders, the banquet became an orgy, which, however, suddenly ceased at the sound of the stately and inspired music. For nearly half an hour, no one spoke. Then, amidst a great sound, the door of the dining hall swung open, and thousands of lighted tapers, held by invisible hands, entered. These were followed by the 2 pages lighted the beautiful Virgo Lucifera, seated on the self-moving throne. The white and gold robed virgin then rose and announced that to prevent the admission of unworthy persons to the mystical wedding, a set of scales would be erected the following day, upon which each guest would be weighed to determine his integrity. Those unwilling to undergo this ordeal, she stated, would remain in the dining hall. She then withdrew, but many of the tapers stayed to accompany the guests to their quarters for the night. Most of those present were presumptuously enough to believe that they could be safely weighed, but 9, including CRC, felt their shortcomings so deeply that they feared the outcome and remained in the hall, while the others were led away to their sleeping chambers. These 9 were bound with ropes and left alone in darkness. CRC then dreamt that he saw many men suspended over the earth by threads, and among them flew an aged man who, cutting here and there a thread, caused many to fall to earth. Those who in arrogance had soared to lofty heights accordingly fell a greater distance and sustained more serious injury than the most humble ones, falling but a short distance, often landed without a mishap. Considering this dream to be a good omen, CRC related it to the companion, continuing in discourse with him until dawn. The third day. Soon after dawn, the trumpet sounded, and Virgo Lucifera, arrayed in red velvet, gridded with a white sash and crowned with a laurel wreath, entered accompanied by 200 men in red and white livery. She intimidated to CRC and his 8 companions that they might fare better than the others. Self-satisfied guests. Golden scales were then hung in the midst of the hall, and near them were placed 7 weights, 1 good size, 4 small, and 2 very large. The men in livery, each carrying a naked sword and a strong rope, were divided into 7 groups, and from each group was chosen a captain, who was given charge of one of the weights. Having remounted her high throne, Virgo Lucifera ordered the ceremony to begin. The first to step on the scale was an emperor so virtuous that the balances did not tip until 6 weights had been placed upon the opposite end. He was therefore turned over to the 6th group. The rich and poor alike stood among the scales, but only a few passed the test successfully. To these were given velvet robes and wreaths of laurel, after which they were seated upon the steps of Virgo Luciferia's throne. Those who failed were ridiculed and scourged. The Inquisition being finished, one of the captains begged Virgo Luciferia to permit the 9 men who had declared themselves unworthy also to be weighed, and this caused CRC anguish and fear. Of the first 7, 1 succeeded and was greatly overjoyed. CRC was the 8th, and he did not only withstood all the weights, but even when 3 men hung on the opposite end of the beam, he could not be moved. A page cried out, "That is he." CRC was quickly set at liberty and permitted to release one of the captives. He chose the first emperor, Virgo Luciferia, then requested the red roses that CRC carried, which he immediately gave to her. The ceremony of the scales ended about 10 o'clock in the forenoon. After agreeing upon the penalties to be imposed upon those whose shortcomings had been thus exposed, a dinner was served to all. The few successful artists, including CRC, were given the chief seats, after which the golden fleece and a flying lion were bestowed upon them in the name of the bridegroom. Virgo Luciferia then presented a magnificent goblet to the guests, stating that the king had requested all to share its contents. Following this, CRC and his companions were taken out upon a scaffolding, where they beheld the various penalties suffered by those who failed. Before leaving the palace, each of the rejected guests was given a draught of forgetfulness. The elect then returned to the castle, where to each was assigned a learned page, who conducted them through the various parts of the edifice. CRC saw many things his companions were not privileged to behold, including the royal sepulchre, where he learned more than is extant in all books. He also visited a magnificent library and an observatory containing a great globe 30 feet in diameter, and with all the countries of the world marked upon it. At supper, the various guests propounded enigmas, and CRC solved the riddles which Virgo Luciferia asked concerning her own identity. Then, entering the dining hall, 2 youths and 6 virgins beautifully robed, followed by a 7th virgin wearing a coronet. The latter was called the Duchess and was mistaken for the Hermetic bride. The Duchess told CRC that he had received more than the others, therefore should make a greater return. The Duchess then asked each of the virgins to pick one of the 7 weights, which still remained in the great room. To Virgo Luciferia was given the heaviest weight, which was hung in the queen's chamber during the singing of a hymn. In the 2nd chamber, the first virgin hung her weight during a similar ceremony. Thus they proceeded from room to room until the weights had been disposed of. The Duchess then presented her hand to CRC and his companions, and followed by her virgins withdrew. Pages then conducted the guests to their sleeping chambers. The one assigned to CRC was hung with rare tapestries and with beautiful paintings. Fourth day, after washing and drinking in the garden from a fountain, which bore several inscriptions, among them one reading, "Drink, brothers, and live," the guests, led by Virgo Luciferia, ascended the 365 steps of the royal winding stairs. The guests were given wreaths of laurel, and a curtain being raised, found themselves in the presence of the king and queen. CRC was awestruck by the glory of the throne room, and especially by the magnificence of the queen's robes, which were so dazzling that he could not gaze upon them. Each guest was presented to the king one by one of the virgins, and after the ceremony, the Virgo Luciferia made a short speech in which she recited the achievements of the honest artist and begged that each be questioned as to whether she had properly fulfilled her duty. Old Atlas then stepped forward and, in the name of their royal majesties, greeted this intrepid band of philosophers and assured Virgo Luciferia that she should receive a royal reward. The length of the throne room was 5 times its width. To the west was a great porch in which stood 3 thrones, the central one elevated. On each throne sat 2 persons. On the first, an ancient king with a young consort. On the third, a black king with a veiled matron beside him, and a central throne, 2 young persons over whose heads hung a large and costly crown, about which hovered a little Cupid, who shot his arrow first at the 2 lovers and then about the hall. Before the queen, a book bound in black velvet lay on a small altar on which were golden decorations. Beside this were a burning candle, a celestial globe, a small striking watch, a little crystal pipe from which ran a stream of clear blood red liquor, and a skull with the white serpent crawling in and out of the orbits. After their presentation, the guests retired down the winding stairs to the great hall. Later, the Virgo Luciferia announced that a comedy was to be performed for the benefit of the 6 royal guests in a building called the House of the Sun. CRC and his companions formed part of the royal procession, which after a considerable walk arrived at the theater. The play was in 7 acts, and after its happy ending, all returned through the garden and up the winding stairs to the throne room. CRC noticed that the young king was very sad, and that at the banquet following, he often sent meat to the white serpent in the skull. The feast over, the young king, holding in his hand the little black book from the altar, asked the guests if they would be all true to him through prosperity and adversity, and when they trembly agreed to ask that each should sign his name in the little black book as proof of his fealty, the royal persons then drank from the little crystal fountain. The others afterwards doing likewise. This was called the Drought of Silence. The royal persons then sadly shook hands with all present. Suddenly a little bell tinkled, and immediately the king and queens took off their white garments and donned black ones. The room was hung in sable draperies, and the tables were removed. The eyes of the royal persons were bound with 6 black taffeta scarves, and 6 coffins were placed in the center of the room. An executioner, a Moor, robed in black and bearing an axe, entered and beheaded in each turn each of the 6 royal persons. The blood of each was caught in a golden goblet, which was placed in the coffin with the body. The executioner was also decapitated and his head placed in a small chest. The Virgo Luciferia, after assuring CRC and his companions that all would be well if they were faithful and true, ordered the pages to conduct them to their rooms for the night, while she remained to watch with the dead. After midnight, CRC awakened suddenly and looked for his window, beheld 7 ships sailing upon a lake. Above each hovered a flame. These he believed to be the spirits of the beheaded. When the ships reached the shore, the Virgo Luciferia met them, and on each of the 6 vessels were placed a covered coffin. As soon as the coffins had been thus disposed of, the lights were extinguished and the flames passed back over the lake so that there will remain but one light for a watch in each ship. After holding the strange ceremony, CRC returned to his bed and slept till morning. The 5th day. Rising at daybreak and entreating his page to show him other treasures of the palace, CRC was conducted down many steps to a great iron door bearing a curious inscription, which he carefully copied. Passing through, he found himself in a royal treasury, the light in which came entirely from some huge carbuncle. We're going to skip that word. In the center stood the triangular sepulchre of Lady Venus. Lifting a copper door in the pavement, the page ushered CRC into a crypt where stood a great bed upon which, when his guide had raised the coverlets, CRC beheld the body of Venus. Led by his page, CRC then rejoined his companions, saying nothing to them of this experience. Virgo Luciferia, robed in black velvet and accompanied by her virgins, then led the guests out into the courtyard where there stood 6 coffins with each 8 pallbearers. CRC was the only one of the group of artists who suspected the royal bodies were no longer in these coffins. The coffins were lowered into the graves and great stones rolled over them. The Virgo Luciferia then made a short oration in which she exhorted each to assist in restoring the royal persons to life, declaring that they should journey with her to the Tower of Olympus, where the medicines necessary to the resuscitation of the 6 royal persons could alone be found. CRC and his companions followed Virgo Luciferia to the seashore, were all embarked on 7 ships disposed according to a certain strange order. As the ships sailed across the lake and through a narrow channel into the open sea, they were attended by sirens, nymphs, and sea goddesses, who in honor of the wedding presented a great and beautiful pearl to the royal couple. When the ships came in sight of the Tower of Olympus, Virgo Luciferia ordered the discharge of cannon to signal their approach. Immediately a white flag appeared upon the tower, and a small gilded pennant containing an ancient man, the warden of the tower, with his white-clad guards, came out to meet the ships. The Tower of Olympus stood upon an island which was exactly a square and was surrounded by a great wall. Entering the gate, the group was led to the bottom of the central tower, which contained an excellent laboratory where the guests were fain to beat and wash plants, precious stones, and all sorts of things, extract their juice and essence, and put these later into glasses. Virgo Luciferia set the artists to work so arduously that they felt they were more drudges. When the day's work was finished, each was assigned a mattress on the stone floor. Being unable to sleep, CRC wondered about contemplating the stars. Chancing upon a flight of steps leading to the top of the wall, he climbed up and looked out upon the sea, remaining here for some time. About midnight, he beheld 7 flames, which, passing over the sea towards him, gathered themselves on the top of the spire of the central tower. Simultaneously, the winds arose, the sea became tempestuous, and the moon was covered with clouds. With some fear, CRC ran down the stairs and returned to the tower, lying down on the mattress, was lulled to sleep by the sound of a gently flowing fountain in the laboratory. The 6th day. The next morning, the aged warden of the tower, after examining the work performed by the wedding guests in the laboratory and finding it satisfactory, caused ladders, ropes, and large wings to be brought forth and addressed the assembled artists thus: "My dear sons, one of these 3 things must each of you this day constantly bear around with him." Lots were cast to CRC. Much to his chagrin, fell a very heavy ladder. Those who secured the wings had them fastened to their backs so cunningly that it was impossible to detect that they were artificial. The age warden then locked the artists in the lower room of the tower, but in short time a round hole was uncovered in the ceiling, and Virgo Luciferia invited all to ascend. Those with wings flew at once through the opening. Those with ropes had many difficulties, while CRC with his ladder made unreasonable speed. On the second floor, the wedding guests, musicians, and Virgo Luciferia gathered upon a fountain-like contrivance containing the bodies of the 6 royal persons. Virgo Luciferia then placed the Moor's head in a kettle-like receptacle in the upper part of the fountain and poured upon it the substance prepared on the previous day in the laboratory. And the virgins placed lamps beneath. These substances were then boiled, passed out through holes in the side of the kettle, and falling upon the bodies in the fountain below, dissolved them. The 6 royal bodies having been reduced thus to a liquid state, a tap was opened in the lower end of the fountain, and the fluid drained into an immense golden goblet, which, when filled, was a great weight. All but the wedding guests then retired, and shortly a hole in the ceiling opened as before, and the guests ascended pell-mell to the 3rd floor, where the globe was suspended by a strong chain. The walls of the apartment were of glass, and mirrors were so arranged that the sun's rays were concentrated upon the central globe, thus making it to become very hot. Later, the sun's rays were deflected, and the globe permitted to cool, after which was cut open with a diamond, revealing a beautiful white egg. Carrying with her Virgo Luciferia departed. The guests, having ascended through another trap door, found themselves upon the 4th floor, where stood a square kettle filled with silver and sand, warmed by a gentle fire. The great white egg was placed upon the warm sand to mature. In a short time it cracked, and there emerged an ugly, ill-tempered bird, which was fed with the blood of the beheaded royal persons, diluted with prepared water. At each feeding, its feathers changed color. From black, they turned to white, and at last they became a vari-colored, the disposition of the bird improving with the while. Dinner was then served, after which Virgo Luciferia departed with the bird. The guests ascended with ropes, ladders, and wings to the 5th floor, where a bath colored with fine white powder had been prepared for the bird, which enjoyed bathing in it until the lamps placed beneath the bath caused the water to become uncomfortably warm. When the heat had removed all the bird's feathers, it was taken out, but the fire continued until nothing remained in the bath, save a sediment in the form of a blue stone. This was later pounded up and made into a pigment. With this, all of the bird except the head was painted. The guests thereupon ascended to the 6th floor, where stood a small altar resembling that in the king's throne room. The bird drank from the little fountain and was fed with the blood of the white serpent, which crawled through the opening in the skull. The sphere by the altar revolved continuously. The watch struck 1, 2, and then 3, at which time the bird, laying its neck upon the book, suffered itself to be decapitated. Its body was burned to ashes, which was placed in a box of cypress wood. Virgo Luciferia told CRC that the 3 of his comrades that they were lazy and sluggish laborers, and would therefore be excluded from the 7th room. Musicians were sent for with cornets, while to blow the 4th in ridicule for the chamber. CRC and his 3 companions were disheartened until the musicians told them to be of good cheer and led them up a winding stair to the 8th floor of the tower directly beneath the roof. Here the old warden, standing upon a little round furnace, welcomed them and congratulated them upon being chosen by Virgo Luciferia for this greater work. Virgo Luciferia then entered, and after laughing at the perplexity of her guests, emptied the ashes of the bird into another vessel, filling the cypress box with useless matter. She, thereupon, returned to the 7th floor, presumably to mislead those assembled there by setting them to work upon the false ashes in the box. CRC and his 3 friends were set to work moistening the bird's ashes with specially prepared water until the mixture became of dough-like consistency, after which it was heated and molded into 2 miniature forms. Later, these were opened, disclosing 2 bright and almost transparent human images about 4 inches high, 1 male and 1 female. These tiny forms were laid upon satin cushions and fed drop by drop with the blood of the bird until they grew to normal size and of great beauty. Though the bodies had the consistency of flesh, they showed no signs of life, for the soul was not in them. The bodies were necks surrounded with torches and their faces covered with silk. Virgo Luciferia then appeared bearing 2 curious white garments. The virgins also entered among them, 6 bearing great trumpets. A trumpet was placed upon the mouth of one of the 2 figures, and CRC saw a tiny hole open in the dome of the tower, and a ray of light descended through the tube of the trumpet and entered the body. This process was repeated 3 times on each body. The 2 newly ensouled forms were then removed upon a traveling couch. In about half an hour, the young king and queen awakened, and Virgo Luciferia presented them with the white garments. These they donned, and the king in his own person most graciously returned thanks to CRC and his companions, after which the royal persons departed upon a ship. CRC and his 3 privileged friends then rejoined the other artists, making no mention of which they had seen. Later, the entire party was assigned handsome chambers where they rested till morning. So, my power decided to go off and then come back on, and I just lost almost the entire video. So I'm going to finish the 7th day, and hopefully I could somehow edit these 2 videos together. The 7th day. In the morning, Virgo Luciferia announced that each of the wedding guests had become a knight of the golden stone. The age warden then presented each man with a golden medal, bearing on one side the inscription AR, NAT, MI, and on the other TEM and AF. The entire company returned in 12 ships to the king's palace. The flags on the vessels bore the signs of the zodiac, and CRC sat under that of Libra. As they entered the lake, many ships met them, and the king and queen, together with their lords, ladies, and virgins, robed forth on a golden barge to greet the returning guests. Alas then made a short oration in the king's behalf, also asking for the royal presents. In reply, the age warden delivered to Cupid, who hovered over the royal pair, a small, curious-shaped casket. CRC and the old lord, each bearing a snow-white ensign with a red cross on it, rode in the carriage with the king. At the first gate stood the porter with blue clothes, who, upon seeing CRC, begged him to intercede with the king to release him from the post of servitude. The king replied that the porter was a famous astrologer who was forced to keep the gate as a punishment for the crime of having gazed upon Lady Venus reposing upon her couch. The king further declared that the porter could be released only when another was found who had committed the same crime. Upon hearing this, CRC's heart sank, for he realized himself to be the culprit, but he remained silent at the time. The newly created kings of the Golden Stone were obliged to subscribe to 5 articles drawn up by His Royal Highness. 1, that they would ascribe their order only to God and his handmaid, nature, that they should abominate all uncleanliness and vice, that they should always be ready to assist the worthy and needy, that they should not use their knowledge and power for obtainment of worldly dignity, that they should not desire to live longer than God had decreed. Sorry, guys, that they were duly installed as knights, which ceremony was ratified in a little chapel where CRC hung up his golden fleece and his hat for eternal memorial, And here he inscribed the following: Summa Sentia Nihil Scri Fr Christianus Rosicrucius. There's some Latin, and I don't know how to say that. 1459. After the ceremony, CRC admitted that he was the one who had beheld Venus and consequently must become the porter of the gate. The king embraced him fondly, and he was assigned to a great room containing 3 beds, one for himself, one for the aged lord of the tower, and for the third old Atlas. The chemical marriage here comes to an abrupt end, leaving the impression that CRC was to assume his duties as porter on the following morning. Hang on, guys. Sorry about that, guys. The book ends in the middle of a sentence with a note in italics, presumably by the editor. Under the symbolism of an alchemical marriage, and medieval philosophers concealed the secret system of spiritual culture whereby they hoped to coordinate the disjuncta memora of both the human and the social organisms. Society, they maintained, was a threefold structure and had its analogy in the triune constitution of man, for as man consists of spirit, mind, and body, so society is made up of a church, the state, and the populace. The bigotry of the church, the tyranny of the state, and the fury of the mob are the 3 murderous agencies of society which seek to destroy truth, as recounted in the Masonic legend of Hiram Abiff. The first 6 days of the chemical marriage set forth the process of philosophical creation through which every organism must pass. The 3 kings are the threefold spirit of man, and their consorts the corresponding vehicles of their expression in the lower world. The executioner is the mind, the higher part of which, symbolized by the head, is necessary to achieve of the philosophical labor. Thus, the parts of man by the alchemists, symbolized as planets and elements, when blended together according to a certain divine formula, result in the creation of 2 philosophic babes, which, fed upon the blood of the alchemical bird, become rulers of the world. From an etherical standpoint, the young king and queen resurrected at the summit of the tower and ensouled by divine life represented the forces of intelligence and love, which must ultimately guide society. Intelligence and love are the 2 great etherical luminaries of the world and correspond to enlightened spirit and regenerated body. The bridegroom in reality is the bride and the regenerated being who obtains perfection by becoming one with reality through a cosmic marriage, wherein the mortal part obtains immortality by being united with its own immortal source. In the Hermetic marriage, divine and human consciousness are united in holy wedlock, and he in whom this sacred ceremony takes place is designated as the Knight of the Golden Stone. He thereby becomes a divine philosophic diamond composed of the quintessence of his own 7-fold constitution. Such is the true interpretation of the mystical process of becoming a bride of the Lamb. The Lamb of God is signified by the golden fleece that Jason was forced to win before he could assume his kingship. The flying lion is illumined will, an absolute prerequisite to the achievement of the great work. The episode of weighing the souls of men has its parallel in the ceremony described in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The walled city entered by CRC represents a sanctuary of wisdom wherein dwell the real rulers of the world, the initiated philosophers. Like the ancient mysteries after which it was patterned, the Order of the Rose Cross possessed a secret ritual which was lived by the candidate for a prescribed number of years before he was eligible to the inner degrees of the society. The various floors of the Tower of Olympus represented the orbits of the planets. The ascent of the philosophers from one floor to another also parallels certain rituals of the Eleusinian mysteries and the rites of Mithras. Within the candidate ascended the 7 rungs of a ladder, or climbed the 7 steps of a pyramid in order to signify release from the influences of the Planetary governors. Man becomes master of the seven spheres only when he transmutes the impulses received from them. He who masters the seven worlds and is reunited with the divine source of his own nature consummates the hermetic marriage. Sorry, guys, for all of that. I'm still working out, not feeling the best. I don't have heat in my house. Electric went out. You know, all signs from the universe that I shouldn't have done a reading today, but I wanted to do a reading today. So I hope all of you enjoyed. I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of issues today with, I'm congested and trying to get things out. I hope it is okay. Sending in all love, light, compassion, grace, shielding, and healing and protection energy. Please be safe, be seen. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. That was really difficult for me. And I do apologize. I know that kind of sucked, but trying to be consistent in some form or fashion. And please check out my website, AllyKatkreations211.com, if you would like any of my creations. I have a lot of pyramids up for sale. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, please email me. All of that's in the description below. And I hope to see you on the next one. Bye.